Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about the models of communication. Communication is a complex process and it is difficult to determine where or with whom a communication encounter starts and ends. Fortunately, we have models of communication. Models of communication simplify the process by providing a visual representation of the various aspects of a communication encounter. In this video, we are going to talk about three models of the communication process. First one, the linear or transmission model, or communication as action. The second one, the interaction model, or communication as interaction. And the third one, the transaction model, or communication as transaction. Let us now discuss the linear or transmission model. In 1949, Claude Shannon, a Bell Laboratories scientist and professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Warren Weaver, a consultant on projects at the Sloan Foundation, described communication as a linear process. They were concerned with radio and telephone technology and wanted to develop a model that could explain how information passed through various channels. The result was the conceptualization of the linear model of communication. This approach to human communication comprises several key elements. A source, or transmitter of a message, sends a message to a receiver, the recipient of the message. The receiver is the person who makes sense out of the message. All of this communication takes place in a channel, which is the pathway to communication. Channels frequently correspond to the visual, tactile, olfactory, and auditory senses. Thus, you use the visual channel when you see your roommate, and you use the tactile channel when you hug your parent. Although this view of the communication process was highly respected many years ago, the approach is very limited for several reasons. First, the model presumes that there is only one message in the communication process. Yet, we all can point to a number of circumstances in which we send several messages at once. Second, communication does not have a definable beginning and ending. Shannon and Weaver's model presumes this mechanistic orientation. Furthermore, to suggest that communication is simply one person speaking to another oversimplifies the complex communication process. Listeners are not so passive as we can all confirm when we are in heated arguments with others. Clearly, communication is more than one-way effort and has no definable middle or end. The linear model suggests a very narrow view of the participants in the communication process. Therefore, in 1954, Wilbur Schramm proposed that we also examine the relationship between a sender and a receiver. He conceptualized the interactional model of communication, which emphasizes the two-way communication process between communicators. In other words, communication goes in two directions, from sender to receiver and from receiver to sender. This circular process suggests that communication is ongoing. The interactional view illustrates that a person can perform the role of either sender or receiver during an interaction, but not both roles simultaneously. One element essential to the interactional model of communication is feedback, or the response to a message. Feedback may be verbal or nonverbal, intentional or unintentional. Feedback helps communicators to know whether or not their message is being received and the extent to which meaning is achieved. In the interactional model, feedback takes place after a message is received, not during the message itself. To illustrate the critical nature of feedback and the interactional model of communication, consider this scene about the imaginary Di Maculangan family. When Mario Di Maculangan's parents find him on the sala set drunk one night, they proceed to tell him how they feel about his behavior. Their outcry prompts Mario to argue with his parents, who, in turn, tell him to leave their house immediately. This interactional sequence shows that there is an alternating nature in the communication between Mario and his parents. They see his behavior and provide their feedback on it. Mario listens to their message and responds. Then, his father sends the final message telling his son to leave. We can take this even further by noting the door slam made by Mario as one additional feedback behavior in the interaction. A final feature of the interactional model is a person's field of experience, or how a person's culture, experiences, and heredity influence his or her ability to communicate with another. Each person brings a unique field of experience to each communication episode, and these experiences frequently influence the communication between people. For instance, when two people come together and begin dating, the two inevitably bring their fields of experience into the relationship. One person in this couple may have been raised in a large family with several siblings, while the other may be an only child. These experiences and others will necessarily influence how the two come together and will most likely affect how they maintain their relationship. Like the linear model, the interactional model has been criticized. The interactional model suggests that one person acts as sender while the other acts as receiver in a communication encounter. As you have experienced, however, people communicate as both senders and receivers in a single encounter. But the prevailing criticism of the interactional model pertains to the issue of feedback. The interactional view assumes two people speaking and listening, but not at the same time. But what occurs when a person sends a nonverbal message during an interaction? Smiling, frowning, or simply moving away from the conversation during an interaction between two people happens all the time. For example, in an interaction between a mother and her daughter, the mother may be reprimanding her child while simultaneously reading the child's nonverbal behavior. Is the girl laughing? Is her daughter upset? Is she even listening to the mother? Each of these behaviors will inevitably prompt the mother to modify her message. So, this is the interactional model of communication. And now, we are going to discuss the transactional model. The transactional model of communication emphasizes the simultaneous sending and receiving of messages in a communication episode. To say that communication is transactional means that the process is cooperative. The sender and the receiver are mutually responsible for the effects and the effectiveness of communication. In the linear model of communication, meaning is sent from one person to another. In the interactional model, meaning is achieved through the feedback of a sender and a receiver. In the transactional model, people build shared meaning. Furthermore, what people say during a transaction is greatly influenced by their past experience. Past experience also features in the interactional model. However, in the transactional model, the overlap of two experiences is emphasized. That is, rather than person A and person B having separate fields of experience, eventually their two fields of experiences merge during their interaction. This is an important addition to the understanding of the communication process because it demonstrates an active process of understanding. That is, for communication to take place, individuals must build shared meaning. And shared meaning is built when the two persons in the interaction share similar experience. If the participants share similar background, they will have a successful communication. Therefore, the transactional model requires each of the participants to understand and incorporate the other's field of experience into his or her life. The transactional model of communication also requires us to recognize the influence of one message on the other. One message builds on the previous message. This is absent in the interactional model. In the transactional model, there is an interdependency between and among the components of communication. A change in one causes a change in others. Furthermore, the transactional model presumes that as we simultaneously send and receive messages, we attend to both verbal and nonverbal elements of a message. In a sense, communicators negotiate meaning. So, for example, if a friend asks you about your family background, you may use some private language that your friend doesn't understand. Your friend may make a face while you are presenting your message, indicating some sort of confusion with what you have said. As a result, you will most likely back up and define your terms and then continue with the conversation. This example highlights the degree to which two people are actively involved in a communication encounter. The non-verbal communication is just as important as the verbal in such a transactional process. Another major difference between the interactional and the transactional model is that while the interactional model does not consider the two participants to be both receiver and sender at the same time, the transactional model considers the two participants as both receivers and senders at the same time. And finally, the transactional model pays attention to the different contexts brought into the interaction. One of the contexts is relational context, which refers to the relationship between the two participants. The other context is situational context, which refers to the situation where the two participants are found. And the third context is cultural context, which pertains to the different cultures that are brought into the conversation.